Hi everyone, I'm Sahar El-Nadi welcoming you. Thank you for tuning in to this exclusive interview for my channel, The Peacock Trap, the leading source of education on narcissism and narcissistic abuse and recovery in Arabic. Our guest today is a special guest. She is Kim Saeed, narcissistic abuse recovery expert, transformative educator, renowned speaker, and best-selling author of How to Do No Contact Like a Boss and 10 Essential Survivor Secrets to Liberate Yourself from Narcissistic Abuse. Kim has gone through her own journey of escaping and recovering from narcissistic abuse, and she decided to help other people around the world break the narcissistic spell. So she has also founded the New Life Academy, an online school devoted to helping narcissistic abuse survivors restore their self-esteem and rebuild their lives. Kim has now helped thousands of people in over 195 countries online. Thank you very much, Kim, and welcome for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Sahara. I was really excited when you emailed me and invited me onto your show.
Thank you so much. Your great work has been one of my resources while researching for my book, Fakh al-Tawus, The Peacock Trap in Arabic. So I really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much.
So everybody, today we'll be talking with Kim about how to see the red flags early on, why it's not a good idea to stay and bring up children in a toxic home environment, and how to leave a narcissist like a boss. So first of all, tell us, Kim, how did you get interested in narcissism so that you ended up helping so many people around the world?
Thank you so much for asking. Well, it's really interesting that we're having this show today because my background is with a man who's Egyptian.
Oh, okay.
So many years ago, I was in banking. I was managing one of the local branches, and I met him through his parents who were customers at my bank. And eventually we started talking and going out. And from there, I ended up entering into a relationship with him. We ended up getting married, despite all of the just screaming red flags that I could see. Wow. And we also have a son together who is almost 11.
Wow, so it's been quite a journey for you.
So back then, I left him a little over 10 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, I had left banking and went back to school to be a teacher. And I started my student teaching there in Cairo at the American International School of Egypt. And I had to leave when the revolution started, mm-hmm. when the people wanted to oust Hosni Mubarak. Yeah. So that is why I ended up coming back here to the States, and he came back with me, but it was shortly after that I left him for good. So I'm very familiar with what people are going through. In fact, when I went to Egypt to start my student teaching, I had gone there and agreed to be his second wife, which for someone like me with my Western culture it's unheard of. But that's how sick I was with trauma bonding and the Stockholm syndrome and everything that we experience when we're trying to leave these relationships. So I shared that because I want people to know that I understand how difficult it is.
I totally see. This is an amazing background, Kim, and the two topics you brought up, the fact that you had an intercultural marriage and the fact that you were a second wife to an Arab Muslim man, that gives a lot of depth to what we are saying today, because a lot of my listeners, of course, live in the Middle East, and also a lot of my listeners who are Middle Eastern or have a Middle Eastern background, they are now Arab Americans, Canadians, or Europeans living in the US and the EU and are either in or considering intercultural marriages. So the insights you will share with us today will be of great help to them to try to focus on the red flags, regardless of the thrill of that sexy foreigner syndrome, you know.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
So what are some of the early warning signals? You mentioned now that you've seen many red flags, such as what?
Well, with my ex, who is Egyptian, with him, his red flags were a little bit more noticeable than some of the other ones might be because of his culture and his background, and being Arabic, because as we know, that particular culture, a large portion of that culture, I should say, still believes that women are property, or that they are a weaker sex, that they need to be controlled. So he was, always yelling. He was always fighting with his sister and his parents. But he could also be extremely sweet. But back then, I had no idea about narcissism. I just thought this was their regular way of dealing with one another. But during that time, I was also being conditioned and basically brainwashed to start to accept these behaviors. And back then, I was highly codependent. I didn't know what that was back then. But I was just a prime target for someone like him because of my own personality traits, being forgiving and compassionate, trying to keep an open mind and trying to be understanding. But the red flags are anytime they're disrespectful to you, or they try to make you feel bad about your appearance or your intelligence. They might try to monopolize all of your free time. That's, when they start to isolate you. They want you to get rid of your friends and the family that you have known for many long years. So those are probably the primary red flags. Or you find out that they are cheating on you, and they have some story behind it. Well, I broke up with this person before we met, but they won't leave me alone. They keep calling. When most of the time it's actually the other way around. The narcissist is the one that won't leave the other person alone.
Yes. And so the confusion between the red flags as toxic behaviors and as part of a foreign culture, this is an interesting distinction we should make, don't you think? That we should study maybe if we're getting into an international or an intercultural relationship, to get to know the other person's culture very well, to make sure that whether this is an influence of their upbringing or that the person is himself or herself a toxic person.
Right, and I'm glad we're making this distinction, because I met a lot of people from the same background, the same religion, who were extremely decent and kind people. So it's not necessarily the background in the religion. It's the particular family's way of dealing with one another. But having said that, there does seem to be a larger percentage of men and women who are narcissistic, because they still do give the man the top importance in that particular culture. But not everyone is like that.
Interesting, because sorry, go ahead.
But it is definitely worth paying attention to for anyone who's considering an intercultural relationship or marriage, especially if you're seeing right away that they are dealing with their family and friends in a way that is completely different from how you deal with your family and friends. Because that is not going to change. It's just going to keep getting worse and worse if they are exhibiting toxic traits and they're shouting at their family members. They're shouting at their own parents and cursing them. Those are really big signs that you should not remain in that relationship, because if you aren't already, you will be the target of that kind of rage.
And it's interesting you and I are making this conversation, because my ex-husband was European. So actually here we are, you and I, from two sides of the world, talking about the same problem. Involving two people from our respective cultures. So this is what I would like to underline here for everybody who's listening to us, who speaks English, the fact that toxic behavior is something that you can find in many people around you, anywhere in the world, and you really need to keep your eyes and your heart very open. I like that in one of your sessions, Kim, you stressed how to leave a narcissist while you are still in love with them. Many people think they should fall out of love first before they can leave. But the truth is you can leave despite being in love, don't you think? So how do you advise us on this matter?
Well, for me and for a lot of people, what we need to understand is, and I'm not sure that this was in this particular article, but narcissism is part of what's called the dark triad, which falls under dark psychology. And what this means is, after many long years of study, narcissism was included in the dark triad. So it's not a matter of, can I make this work? How's this going to affect my kids? It's a matter of survival. And people are not understanding how extremely dangerous it is to maintain a relationship with a narcissist. So for me, I had come back to the States with my ex from his home country. I was very much still in love with him when I left, but I understood that nothing would change unless I changed it myself. And so I had to make that decision for my future and the future of my children, even the son that we shared, because I knew that nothing good would happen if I remained in that relationship. So you have to consider it a matter of survival, whether that's your psychological survival or even your physical survival, because a lot of people do end up feeling suicidal. A lot of people's children take their own lives because they lived in that kind of environment. So people really need to start understanding how dangerous it is.
How dangerous is it for the kids, Kim, to stay in a toxic marriage? Because a lot of women worldwide would stay in a toxic relationship thinking that they are doing this for the sake of their kids. But you stress in your work so much that kids get so affected and that there is this cycle, generational cycle, where toxic behavior and narcissistic traits are passed down from generation to generation. So tell us a little bit about this side.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up because this really is a big passion of mine. Having children in this kind of environment is not a reason to stay. It's actually a reason to leave. Yeah. And you're right. Before we were always told, no matter what was happening, unless there was, just extreme physical violence, we were always encouraged to stay in it for the sake of the kids. But using that advice in this kind of situation is dangerous once again, because we are perpetuating generational narcissism or even codependence. Because what I've seen now, this hasn't necessarily been proven scientifically in a specific way, but what we do know is that children who grow up in a toxic environment where one parent is a narcissist, narcissism is a defense mechanism, just like codependence. So because they're living in that environment, and it's not just the narcissist who is creating the harm, we as codependents are also creating harm because we're modeling to our children how to deal with an abusive spouse. This is what love is like. Love can hurt. Love, and so what we need to start understanding is that children who grow up in this kind of household will either become a codependent and they will go on to attract, so to speak, narcissists for their romantic partners and friends, or they're going to become narcissists themselves. This is what we're seeing now, and we do know that because these are defense mechanisms, it's pretty much they're going to go one way or the other. And that's how we're perpetuating it when we remain in these relationships. And that's not to downplay how difficult it is, because divorcing a narcissist is difficult. Getting into a new home is difficult, but really it's still better than keeping your children in a toxic household.
So what about the difficulties of divorcing a narcissist now that you've brought this up? Because again, a lot of my listeners are asking to give more details about how they can disconnect emotionally, how can they protect themselves from being punished and brought back into the relationship, how can they resist the hoovering phase from the narcissist, how to balance no contact or gray rock techniques with co-parenting with the narcissist, and so on. So what would you do?
Well, I will speak to anyone living in the States because I'm more familiar with the laws here.
Yes.
So divorcing a narcissist, of course, what happens is they're going to rage. They're going to be very upset. They don't believe that their spouses deserve anything from the marriage. It doesn't matter if they were also working and taking care of the household. Narcissists never believe that anyone deserves anything. Now, they might offer something in the beginning. Well, okay, yes, you're right. I think we should get divorced. They may even offer, huge amounts of money. And this is done to make the other person or the target of their abuse start to doubt themselves and to doubt their judgment. Well, if they're offering me all this money and all this stuff from the divorce, maybe I'm wrong about them. Because most of the time what happens is then the narcissist gets to work right away on hiding assets, on trying to dig up any sort of dirt or what could be perceived as dirt on their target of abuse. They start planning ways to really get the other person to not get what they're due in the divorce. And I've seen so many people give in to the narcissist's false stories, and then they get to court and they lose everything, even oftentimes custody of their own children. So it's very important not to fall into, under the narcissist spell and believe they have any sort of good intentions, because they don't. So it's always best to consult with an attorney who's going to be very familiar with the laws of your state and see what your rights are in that particular state, because it does vary. But the main thing to keep in mind is don't believe anything they say.
And what about the kids? How do you ease the kids into the fact that the parents are divorcing? Do you tell the kids that their father or mother are narcissistic and this is why you're leaving them, so that they'd have a heads up about dealing with them? How do you do this?
It really depends on the age of the child. If they're very young, they're not going to understand anything about when you tell them daddy or mommy's a narcissist. They're not going to understand anything about that. So in my own situation, I didn't really say a whole lot because our son was very young. He was maybe a year and a half, maybe two. So I didn't say anything to him. And when he would ask about his dad, I would say, well, he's at work. I didn't want to tell him, well, when I asked your dad for a divorce, he flew off to Egypt and basically abandoned you. I didn't want to tell my 2-year-old son that. So for a while it worked, me telling him that his dad was at work. Once he started getting older and asking about why we weren't together, I would say things like, well, daddy wasn't very nice to mommy. And I would talk to him that way on his level so he could understand, because if they're really young, they're not going to understand all this jargon that we have about narcissistic personality. So we have to be very sensitive to that. If they're a little bit older, they could go one of two ways. Your child might get angry about the divorce, and of course it's going to be extremely hard on them, because they have in their mind, well, mom and dad aren't going to be together anymore, and they might even still internalize some of that, or they might feel relieved.
If they were being abused themselves, if they could notice.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
And how do you when you're co-parenting with a narcissistic husband, and there are kids in the process, and the kids are gonna be seeing their other parents now and again. So how do you, because a lot of my listeners, the reason why I'm taking you into more details in this, a lot of my listeners are asking, when the kids go to see their dad or their mom, they come back with all these toxic ideas being put into their heads by the narcissistic parent about their other parents. So what do you do? Like, before you send the kids to their father or mother, do you tell them to be careful of certain things when they come back? Is there some sort of debriefing, so to speak, that you try to, take the toxins away from them? What do you do?
That's a good question, and it's kind of tricky. I mean, I'll use myself as an example. In my custody agreement, it specifically says that we can't talk badly about the other parent, and we can't remain in the same room with anyone who may be talking badly about the other parent. So we want to avoid the temptation to say bad things about the narcissistic parent.
Of course.
But when this is happening, you want to get your child into counseling or therapy. And that might be a little difficult if you're in a state that requires that both parents agree. Mm-hmm. But if you have primary or sole custody, you don't need the other parents' permission to do that. Mm-hmm. But if you can get your child into therapy, these things will start to come out. Contact an attorney and say, look, my child, every time they come back from their mom or their dad's house, they've been fed all these toxic lies. What can we do? And you might be able to get your custody agreement changed to specify that the other parent cannot talk badly about you.
That's very important. And also the fact that you should take your kids into therapy if you can afford it, and if the law in where you live allows that. I always advise my listeners to do that, because many people don't realize how much the kids suffer because of having to go back and forth between parents who are not on very good terms emotionally and in communication.
At the very least, if you can, try to get your child in with a school counselor. That can offer some help to them if you're not able to get them out into a professional therapist's office right away.
Yes. In your book, How to Do No Contact Like a Boss, what are the difference between the silent treatment from a narcissist and going no contact as a defense mechanism from the victim? Because a lot of people would confuse the two. They would ask, well, isn't this just copying the narcissistic behavior?
It's not. And the difference between the two is intent. So the narcissist does the silent treatment because they want to punish their target of abuse. It's part of their mind control or their brainwashing. And for anyone who doesn't follow me, I do offer a free webinar where I speak specifically about how narcissists are like cult leaders. This is one of the things that cult leaders do. They ostracize one of their members who falls out of line. It's a punishment. Whereas going no contact, again, is a form of survival. You're trying to break free from a dangerous and toxic environment. So you can't compare the two and say, well, I'm being like the narcissist, this is cruel. No, it's not, because when we feel that way, we are projecting our own feelings about being treated with silence onto the narcissist. They're not sitting there feeling sad. They're not sitting there wondering why we're not contacting them. They know exactly why we're not contacting them. This is not their first go around. If we're dealing with an adult narcissist, this has been the pattern of all of their relationships. So when we decide to go no contact, we got to stop thinking that the narcissist is like us and that they're going to suffer. They will get angry. They will not like it when they realize they don't have control over you anymore, but they're not going to suffer emotionally like we do. So that's important to keep in mind. And I think hopefully will help some people make that decision to go no contact, because it's not being like the narcissist. Now, some people think, well, I'm just not going to talk to them for 2 weeks and that'll teach them a lesson. It doesn't teach the narcissist anything. Exactly. All it does, it gives them some extra time to go out and groom new supply, and then they don't have to deal with you calling them. They don't have to deal with as much damage control. So if we are giving them the silent treatment because we're trying to punish them or make them toe the line, it's not going to turn out that way.
Exactly.
So we can't use it to punish them like they use it to punish us.
In your book, Survivor Secrets to Liberate Yourself from Narcissistic Abuse, what are the top 3 most important secrets you can share with us today?
Gosh, I haven't been through that book in quite a while.
Okay.
Well, the top 3 secrets I would, just off the cuff here, is to not give in to their hoovering.
Okay.
Because most of them will hoover, and we might think that because of the passage of time that maybe they've changed, maybe they've seen the light of their evil ways. That's, again, just us projecting our own traits onto them. narcissists, because they are in that realm of dark psychology and part of the dark triad, they don't have empathy, so they cannot feel the same way we do. They might use cognitive empathy, which is the same kind of empathy that torturers use to figure out how to better hurt their targets, but they don't have the emotional and compassionate empathy that we have. So when they come to the door and they're talking about, oh, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, I hurt you, this is all just them repeating things by rote that they know are going to soften you up and make you let them back into your life again. So don't give in to the hoovering.
Okay, that's one. Two.
And number two would be don't watch their social media.
Okay. Stop stalking.
Because now I know a lot of, like with my ex, he never had his profile picture on there. Everything was a secret. He didn't want anyone knowing what was going on in his life. So someone like him, you don't have to worry a whole lot about social media. But I have seen hundreds, maybe thousands of people being destroyed by what they see on the narcissist social media accounts. We've got to realize that all of that is just an illusion. So we might see them on social media and they're flashing their engagement to another person. They're looking all happy. Well, they cannot shut their narcissism off. They are destined to repeat the same patterns with anyone that they're with. So yeah, we're seeing a result of the other person being love bombed, but just like with us, there's going to come a time where the illusion starts to crack and they're going to see the narcissist for who they are. And this is why narcissists typically have a few different supply sources, often ones we don't even know about. Sometimes they even have other families that people don't know about. So don't believe everything you see on social media. Just try not to even get on there and look at their stuff.
Okay, and number three, those were 2 points. And what is the third point to help heal?
The third point would be not to personalize everything they do and say. And that's hard because of the mental conditioning, the mind control, the brainwashing. What they've done over time is they've replaced our thoughts with their own thoughts. And so it's very easy for us to personalize when they say things like, oh, your friends and family warned me about you, but I didn't want to listen to them. You're not as attractive as you were when we first met, or if you were so intelligent, why did this happen? So they're always going to try to break you down. This is just what they do. So if we can avoid personalizing those things, it might help us get through it. And the way I like to explain this to people is, the narcissist is a pathological liar. So why would you believe the things they tell you about yourself? Exactly.
And here comes another important question that I hear a lot from my listeners, and also see a lot in comments in any discussion to do with narcissism, which is how long does it take to heal after breaking up with a narcissist? To be able to regain trust in oneself, in people, and in love again, because a lot of people just lose trust because as a result of being subjected to narcissistic abuse. So what do you think? How long does it take?
That all depends on whether a person starts some kind of therapy or a program. Too many people don't do anything, and that's the worst thing you can do, is not do anything. The second worst thing you can do is get on these public Facebook pages where everyone's on there, and you're seeing people have been on there for a few years and they're not moving forward in any meaningful way. So you have to be really careful about what you feed your mind, and you have to be careful about starting some kind of recovery program, even if that's one that you put together yourself. And I typically tell people, the best course of action is to do some kind of online program that you can do from home in your free time, and also see a trauma specialist. Because when we come out of these relationships, we will have post-traumatic stress disorder. We'll have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And, a lot of times We have been so emotionally damaged that we can even look like we have borderline personality disorder ourselves. Mm-hmm. And Judith Herman talks about this in her book about recovery. Mm-hmm. So doing nothing is the worst thing you can do. So definitely start some kind of healing program for yourself. And how long it takes will depend on whether you are consistent with that. So obviously in the beginning is the most difficult time. So some people think, well, I'm going to sign up for yoga, and then I'm going to go to the gym, and then I'm going to read 3 books every week, and then I'm going to do this with my friends. And they fill up their calendar with tons and tons of things, which might be okay if it helps you not to break no contact. Mm-hmm. So you want to keep yourself busy so that you're not at home alone. But when it comes time to start healing, you have to be consistent with it.
Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with you about going on online forums and how that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, a negative one for people who are trying to heal, because they look at others and then they model themselves against them, thinking that if it happened to somebody else and they could never heal, then why should I? And so I totally agree with you. But the healing program online is something you do, Kim, right? You offer that online.
I do. I have a program called the Essential Break Free Boot Camp, and it kind of leads you through the process of going no contact. Mm-hmm. But if someone has already left, then they could skip through that part and just go on to the healing modules. So there are lots of different things in there to help you come to acceptance, to figure out what your coping schemas are. There are exclusive guided meditations in there for PTSD relief, for releasing past relationships, for inner child healing. Mm-hmm. And this program has been vetted by folks in mental health and neuroscience. So these modules and these exercises are effective if someone does it from start to finish.
Perfect. So people either try to do this on their own, and if they can't, maybe they can go to a therapist, or if they cannot afford that, they have the online option. So there is no excuse, in other words.
Right.
If you want to heal, you can heal. You can do it.
Yeah.
Kim, it's been fantastic talking to you today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. It was really a pleasure.
You've shared so many valuable insights, and I'm sure we are going to invite you back for more once people
I'd love
listen
that.
to it. I would love that
absolutely.
myself. Because the part there is a part you mentioned at the beginning. I just didn't want to distract you from talking about the stuff we agreed on. But the part about being a second wife and marrying into an Arabic culture and being a wife to somebody who's a Muslim, I'm sure a lot of people around the world would like to hear a lot more about that if you're willing to share. So next time we can talk more about that if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Sahar. You take care. Thank you.
We have many more.
And thanks to your listeners as well.
You're very welcome to join us again. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We have a lot more coming up. And while you wait, please don't fall into the peacock trap. I'm Sahar El-Nadi signing off, and see you next time.